With its inverted cranked gull wings and long nose, the Vought F4U Corsair was one of the most iconic fighters of the Second World War. It can be argued this awesome and beautiful piston engine aircraft represented the very pinnacle of American World War II aviation. First entering combat service in 1943 and seeing action in the Korean War and several Cold War conflicts, the Corsair earned a fearsome reputation as a fighter and as an attack aircraft. Whilst at sea, carrier-based Corsairs engaged and shot down multiple Kamikaze aircraft, but perhaps its most distinctive feature was the peculiar sound it made at high speeds. The Japanese nicknamed it Whistling Death. I'm Liam Smith with Agent Smith Voice Productions, and in today's World War II video, I'll jump into the cockpit of this legendary fighter and briefly discuss its role in the Pacific Theater. From the onset of its initial development in 1938, the Corsair was designed to be exceedingly fast, heavily armed, and incorporating the largest engine available at the time, the 2,000 horsepower 18-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial. Thus, in order to compensate for the immense power output, the aircraft's nose was lengthened and was fitted with an enormous 3-blade propeller measuring over 4 meters in length. The Corsair's landing struts needed to be long enough to provide clearance for the massive propeller. The solution to this was an inverted gull wing design, which shortened the required length of the main landing gear. By placing the gear at the bend of the wing, the Corsair's nose was lifted to an adequate height, whilst also providing a sturdy and rugged landing platform to land safely onto an aircraft carrier. In addition to the inverted gull wing design, the intake for the aircraft's turbo supercharger, intercooler, and oil cooler were located in slots in the inboard leading edges of the cranked wings. When enough air at high speeds was sucked through these inlets, it produced the iconic whistling sound that the Japanese tagged with the moniker Whistling Death. The standard armament of the Corsair was 6 M2 Browning 50 caliber heavy machine guns, 3 in each wing. The outer pair consisted of 375 rounds, whilst the 2 inner pairs carried 400 rounds each, equating to 2,350 rounds of ammunition. However, the later Corsair variants such as the F4U4 were equipped with 4 AN M3 20mm cannons, with an ammo capacity of 231 rounds each. In total, this equated to 924 rounds of ammunition. Later in the war, the Corsair also utilized 2,000-pound bombs, rockets, and a sinister new incendiary weapon called napalm. In the Pacific Theater, there were 2 leading American carrier-based fighters before the Corsair's introduction, the F4F Wildcat and F6F Hellcat. Both aircraft were well armed and rugged, providing excellent forward vision, and could endure a level of punishment from enemy aircraft. However, in some combat situations they were outclassed by the Mitsubishi A6M0, Japan's main carrier-based fighter in the Pacific. When the F4U Corsair first arrived in the Pacific Theater, it promised to be more than a match for the highly nimble Japanese Zero. In September 1942, the Corsair first began its test flights from the deck of an aircraft carrier. However, the early tests revealed that the aircraft was plagued with several technical and landing complications. For instance, the aircraft would bounce wildly along the deck of the carrier, and the tail hook would often skip the arresting wires without engaging it. Many of these landings often ended in tragedy, as the Corsair would sometimes become entangled in the safety barriers collide into other aircraft, or crash into the sea. It was due to the subsequent problems in landing on the aircraft carriers that the US Navy handed the Corsair over to the US Marine Corps, who quickly utilized the aircraft at Henderson Airfield on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands on the 12th of February 1943. It found a new lease of life, providing air support for the battle-hardened Marines on the ground. Despite the humid tropical conditions, the pilots quickly learnt how effective a fighter the Corsair could be in the right hands. The Corsair decimated the Japanese Navy and Air Force, with pilots gaining an astonishing 11-to-1 kill ratio over the Mitsubishi Zero and outperforming it in virtually every aspect.
You could turn either direction with ease, and the Japanese Zero couldn't do that. It couldn't turn to the right. So he'd get in a high-speed dive, if they were on your tail, turn to the right, he couldn't make it, and he'd go on by and you'd turn back and say, oh, look what I found. And that was the end of him.
There was a Zero not 200 feet right there, just dead eye right there. And I just blasted him, it blew up.
My first actual kill was off of Guadalcanal. In the first fight in the Corsair, got into a pretty good tangle. I had a flight of 8 and they had a flight of 16. We actually decimated them. I got 5 myself in that one fight.
One of the most famous Corsair squadrons in the Pacific Campaign was Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 214. It was led by Commander Major Greg Boyington, whom his fellow pilots nicknamed him Pappy. On the evening of September the 13th, 1943, the men gathered together to think of a name for their squadron. They originally decided on calling themselves Boyington's Bastards, after their new commanding officer, but they eventually settled on a name on which the newspapers could print: the Black Sheep. The squadron fought for 84 days, shooting down 203 aircraft and producing 9 fighter aces. The intense air battles in the Solomon Islands marked a turning point in the Pacific Campaign as the Japanese quickly went on the defensive. But the Corsair's role as a versatile fighter-bomber would all change in late 1944 when it returned to the role it was originally designed for, as a carrier-based aircraft. What's really fascinating is that the British Royal Navy were the first to adopt the Corsair for carrier operations. However, a couple of modifications had to be made. The wings of the Corsair had to be clipped by 8 inches because the aircraft couldn't fit into a Royal Navy carrier hangar deck, even when the wings were folded. This small change also increased the Corsair's roll rate. The Royal Navy first flew the Corsair into combat on the 3rd of April 1944, in which 1834 Naval Air Squadron flew from the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious to provide air support in attacks against the German battleship Tirpitz. The Corsair didn't operate in a combat role from US Navy carriers until late 1944. Although the issue with forward visibility couldn't be solved, many of the deficiencies associated with the aircraft had been solved by the British Royal Navy. They developed a technique by approaching the carrier in a long, gentle curve and then keeping the deck in view until the very last moment. This maneuver was later perfected by the US Navy to great success, but landing on an aircraft carrier, regardless if it was a Wildcat or Hellcat, was always a risky situation. Although accidents were frequent on aircraft carrier decks, most pilots managed to tame the Corsair. Throughout the rest of the Pacific Theater, as America wrestled control from the Japanese and gained total naval and air superiority, the Corsair played a pivotal role in defending against fanatical kamikaze suicide attacks. During the bloody battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Corsairs relentlessly hammered Japanese positions. American infantrymen nicknamed the Corsair Angels of Okinawa due to its excellent role in providing air support. After the conclusion of the Second World War, the Corsair flew extensively as a fighter bomber. In the Korean War, and the French colonial wars in Indochina and Algeria. Over 12,571 F4U Corsairs were manufactured, in 16 separate models, and its 1942 to 1953 production run was the longest of any US piston engine fighter. Thank you so much as always for watching. I really enjoy making these history videos, and don't forget to give us a like and to subscribe for more content. Finally, a shout out to my awesome subscribers for your ongoing support of the channel. Liam Smith with Agent Smith Voice Productions. Until then, stay tuned. I'll see you next time.